From Anshei Sphard-Beth Emeth congregation, it's time to take 10 minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of remembering the name of the wicked. The question is, when someone does something really particularly evil, should we remember their name or should we forget it? This question came up, most unfortunately, recently in New Zealand with the shooting and massacres that killed 50 people in the two mosques in New Zealand. And the Prime Minister, very wisely perhaps, suggested that the name of the perpetrator should be blotted out. She's not going to mention the name of the perpetrator. She asked various news agencies, Google, to suppress the name of this person on the hopes that they don't become a hero, an icon within the world of hate and white supremacy. This idea sounds absolutely wonderful and amazing. At the same time, it seems to fly in the face of this special Torah reading this Shabbat Zachor, where we read from the end of Deuteronomy 25, where it says, Zachor asher aseh Amalek, remember what Amalek did to you. And on the one hand, agrees with the Prime Minister, Timche et zecher Amalek, wipe out the name of Amalek, lo tishkach. But then it says, don't forget. Which one is it? You forget or don't remember or don't forget? It seems superfluous. What's going on? So the Alshich, famous mystic from Tzfat, he said, I don't understand. Why don't we just blot his name out? Why do we have to remember it? And then he says, why should we remember this forever? It says in the other reading we read in Bishalach, we read on Purim, say, it's a war from generation to generation. Why? Why not get the war done with? Be done with it. So what's really going on? Rabbi Soloveitchik says that the main thing is not to forget that there is a concept of such wickedness. In other words, sometimes you get lulled into a sense that, everybody's good folks, everybody's nice, and there's no reason to assume that anyone would do anything really super evil. We don't need to protect our early childhood centers, our Jewish community center, a synagogue, mosque. People are praying. Shouldn't be any problem. No one would ever do anything like that, would they? And by remembering the evil, perhaps even their name, we were reminded that there is evil in the world, and you have to be vigilant, you have to be careful. The Alshich says, look, evil, God's plan is that evil's not to be eradicated, in the days of Moses. Evil will go on, so don't forget, it still goes on. Rabbi Bachya has a more hopeful sort of point. He says that it will be forgotten one day. You shouldn't remember it, but you shouldn't forget, but don't forget. It will be forgotten. People will forget it. In other words, there will come a day when people will say, September 11th, in many ways, we don't want anyone to forget the Holocaust, but it would be nice if people weren't reminded of it every time there was a genocide in the world. There'll be a day when it'll be hard to remember. We'll have to try not to forget. He says an interesting thing in terms of the Torah reading. We say, Lo tishkach, lo tishkach. We separate lo and tishkach, don't forget. So we say, don't forget, as if we're saying, forget. In some ways, the Prime Minister is right. We need to just forget it. There is a day when the Kisei will be shalem. As it says in Zechariah, as we see at the end of Aleinu, one day God's name will be complete. We will succeed in wiping him out. Rav Shamshon Frau Hirsch says similarly, don't forget that one day his name will be blotted out. There will come such a day. But also, he says, we need to remember, because when a person suffers from evil, they need to remember that, yes, there is evil in the world, and yes, it will be wiped out one day. There is an eternal war that God himself has with evil. The Gemara Megillah says, remember That's with words. That's by reading the special Torah reading for Parshat Zachor. We just read this past Shabbat. That's by reading the Megillah, which reminds us of the evil of Haman. That's with your mouth. And lo tishkach, don't forget, that's in your heart. As our salvation said, in your heart, you need to know that there can be evil. You need to feel it. Yes, there can be evil in this world. Be prepared for it. So Moshe Feinstein points out, it's the feeling. We say the heart because it's all about the feelings. Me'am Loez has a very important point, similar to Rabbi Soloveitchik, and that is, don't forget, not so much the word Amalek. We're not interested in remembering, suicide bombers and shooters. That's not the point. But we have to remember that which was going on as the Jews were attacked by Amalek. We said, is God really among us? We feel like we don't need God's protection. Everything's fine. And then all of a sudden you realize, as Rashi points out, when your father takes you off your shoulders and puts you down on the ground, there are lions and tigers and bears all around. We have to remember that we're on God's shoulders. That feeling that we don't need God. Everything's going fine. It's great. 21st century. Everything's terrific. That idea that we don't need God. That's what we shouldn't forget, that there are Amaleks out there and we need to appreciate God for saving us from these things at all times. That's what we shouldn't forget. It's not the evil person and his name that we shouldn't forget. The Sforno says to wipe it out means to wipe out all vestiges of it. That's why King Saul was told in the book of Samuel to wipe out, Mishor, Adsev, Migamal, Ad Chamor, any sort of animals that they had, any possessions they had. We don't want to remember anything about it. From that perspective, perhaps the name would be good to go with it as well, to go to the trash can of history. The Meshech Chochmah brings us to a pasuk, a verse in Tehillim, where also we ask God not to forget all the different enemies. Zechor zot oyev cherev Hashem. Remember the enemy who cursed God. He says, Riva rivecha, you got to fight our fight. Zechor cherpatcha. Remember your desecration. When Haman says, let's kill the Jews, he's saying, God doesn't care. There's no covenant of God in the Jewish people. When Hitler says, let's wipe them all out, he says, nobody's going to protect them. And Mini Naval, we have to remember that Naval, that wicked, baseless person who perpetrates these types of things. Al tishkach kol tzorecha, don't forget the voice of your enemy. She'on kamecha ola tamid. You should always remember the voice of the wicked ones at all times. So it's something we want God to remember. To remember the affliction and the suffering that we suffered. It's something that we want to remember. Now, the Megillah also makes these reference to the idea of not forgetting. The Yosef Lekach, Rabbi Elazar Ashkenazi, in his wonderful commentary on the book of Esther, he says, why do we mention the names of the 10 sons of Haman? There they are. Every year we perpetuate the names of the sons of Haman. He says, no. Sometimes when you hang someone, you don't care if they were mutilated. But in this case, we want everyone to know. These are their names. These are great officers, great famous anti-Semites. And we want to disgrace them by specifically knowing what their name was. And yes, they were destroyed. It's a greater victory to say, yes, these are their specific names. They had great standing. Once upon a time, these names, Vaizata, these were names that were known in the world of the anti-Semites and the haters. But now they've been lost. We want to remember the fall, not their names, but how they fell. Finally, it says in the Megillah, "V'zichram lo yasuf mizaram," the remembrance of this story will never be forgot. And Rabbi Elazar Ashkenazi says it's that famous rabbinic saying that all the holidays may go away, but Purim will never be forgotten. Purim will always remain, because we always need to remember the suffering the Jews suffered, so that God will have mercy on us. Remember that the possibility of evil does exist because there's free will. There is that possibility. And finally, Rabbi Bachki says, "Lo, tishkach." We hope that will come a time when things will be so good, and evil will be blotted out to such a degree that we indeed would have the privilege, we'd have the luxury of actually forgetting. In the meantime, sometimes we do need to remember. Remember the name or not remember the name. Could be that if there's a sense that there's a great list of heroes developing somewhere of all the great white supremacists, maybe we shouldn't mention their names. But in general, we don't want to forget acts of evil. We want to remember them because we want to be vigilant and remember that this, within the human personality, there is this possibility of evil. And until that tendency is wiped out, we need to remember it and be vigilant and protect against it forevermore. Thank you for joining us here at the Anshei Sphard-Beth Emeth congregation for our discussion of Purim. Join us for each week for the discussion of the Parsha, how-to videos, and more. And thanks to Jason Lefkowitz, our producer. And we wish everyone a happy Purim, a Chag Purim Sameach.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein. To learn more, visit asb.org.